rest?
Do you think most people are here?
All right. So maybe we can start now. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on ethical and responsible use of AI supervision HDR candidate in the new times. We're also grateful to have Prof. Simon Morse and also Prof. Huan Lin Cheng here with us as our speaker today. So I'll hire you, Prof. Prof. Simon.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to begin now. And thank you very much for inviting me. And hopefully this will be an interesting presentation. We've got some interesting insights that we'd like to share. And obviously, we're very open to your ideas and feedback and suggestions as well. Let me just begin by sharing my slides.
All right.
And let me know if you can see those slides. Let me just start that show.
All right. So we can see your slide.
Okay.
So so without further ado, I will pass the virtual mic to Prof. Simon to start first. So Prof, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to begin this conversation with a bit of a discussion on some of the really interesting ways in which people can use artificial intelligence to improve their research. And this is obviously useful for research candidates, for supervisors and researchers in general. And most of you already know of obviously some of these uses of generative AI, such as ChatGPT, but we might be able to sort of share some insights and uses of AI that you might not have considered or might not have used before. So we want to start with that conversation, and then we'll talk about some of the sort of the qualifications and complications with using AI for these purposes, as well as how to manage these complications. And in particular, AI can be used for a whole different range of stages in research, from understanding the literature to choosing methods, improving writing, and so forth. So let me discuss each of these phases in turn. Okay. So firstly, I'd like you to think about for a moment how often you have used AI for some of the following purposes. So let me give you an example. So for example, have you used AI to help you determine how to search the literature to understand a particular topic? So for example, have you included a prompt like, for my research on a particular topic, what are the 20 keywords, 10 theories, and 40 concepts, or 20 authors, or something like that I should consider? You might not include all that prompt as one sentence. It might be spread over several prompts, but this is an example where AI can really help you search the literature quite effectively. And that's very basic, of course. So let me show you something a little bit more interesting. How many of you have used other packages like one called Insightful that can also be used to understand the literature a lot more effectively? So for example, this particular tool can be used to be able to identify what publications or articles you would need to read to connect two topics. So for example, let's just suppose, for instance, that you were interested in the concept of stress and you were interested in the concept of supervision. And you wanted to understand how the stress of supervisors could influence their supervision practices. To determine what you might need to read to connect or link these two topics, you can use a package called, or an AI tool called Insightful, as specified above, and then simply enter a prompt like this one, such as, which publications should I read? Connect these two topics. And the tool will then identify all the different articles and papers that you would need to read to understand how these concepts are related. And that can really help you generate an insightful and compelling research question. A similar tool is called Connected Papers. And this tool can be used to identify all the different publications you might have overlooked to explore a particular topic. So in particular, you would access this tool called Connected Papers, as an example. You then upload some of the publications that you've already downloaded to your computer, and then you can ask the tool to identify those publications that you've overlooked that could help you understand this topic a lot better. And similarly, you can also use various tools such as Elicit to help you summarize those papers more effectively. So if you, for example, uploaded a whole lot of publications you plan to read, initially you don't have to read all those publications. Instead, you could ask the tool to summarize these publications and answer a particular question. So for example, you could enter a question like, how does stress affect supervision, as identified by these publications? And the tool will then generate a summary that you can utilize to help you really understand that literature more effectively. And this can be quite useful, particularly for PhD candidates who are wanting to learn about a new topic as quickly as possible. And finally, of course, AI can be used to help you just understand difficult papers more effectively. So if, for example, a PhD candidate or even an experienced researcher is reading a paper that's quite complicated and hard for them to understand, they can ask any AI tool, such as ChatGPT, just to summarize this paper in a couple of simple paragraphs. And I'm sure that's something you've used before. And as you probably know, many of these tools are becoming increasingly advanced in their capacity to help us understand literature. So for example, in ChatGPT is a new tool called Deep Research, or at least relatively new, and then it can help you essentially conduct a lot of the literature review automatically. In particular, Deep Research can search the web itself to identify publications. It can then compile or store these publications about a particular topic, and then it can even deliver reports, such as summarize the publications on a topic all by itself. You don't have to ask lots of prompts. It'll undertake a whole series of these tasks autonomously. Okay. So that's how AI can be used to understand literature, as an example. Of course, AI tools can also be used to help PhD candidates, supervisors, and researchers optimize the methods they use to collect data and to analyze data for their research as well. And so a question you might want to ask yourself is, which of the following examples that I provide would you recommend to your candidates? That is, which of the examples do you think are useful and which of the examples might not be so useful? So let me provide some illustrations. So for example, let's suppose a candidate or you were wanting to measure stress as part of your research. You could then ask the tool to identify all the possible methods or techniques that exist, and then to rate all these methods on key criteria, such as which method is the most valid, which measure is simplest and doesn't take too much time, which measure is the least expensive, that which should be inexpensive rather than inexperienced, I should say, and which method is, say, the simplest. Okay. And then the tool will sort of rate each of these measures, and then you can even ask the tool, based on this information, which of the tools would you recommend? Or, of course, the candidate or researcher can reach that decision themselves based on this information. But regardless, this question just provides a whole lot of information about all the alternative techniques that could be used to, say, measure a particular variable, and helps you decide which of these alternatives might be most appropriate for your research. Similarly, AI can be used to actually analyze social media. So you can include a prompt like this where you specify a particular address on social media, and then you can ask the tool to analyze the information or the comments or the posts within this social media account. You could ask the tool, for example, to identify as many positive comments and negative comments as possible to identify or undertake what's called a sentiment analysis, for example. And similarly, as you probably know, many tools can be used to actually analyze the data without the candidate actually having to use standard software such as SPSS, R, or Stata. So for example, all the candidate or researcher actually needs to do nowadays with tools like Julius and other tools as well, is to just upload their data to this tool. And then they can basically write just a very broad prompt like, can you conduct all the analysis I need to complete and generate some helpful displays about this research question? So essentially, all the researcher would need to do is sort of write their research question, and then ask the tool to conduct the data analysis. And the tool will conduct that data analysis by itself. Now, later I'll talk about some limitations or problems with these tools, such as the fact that you really shouldn't be uploading sensitive data to these tools. But nevertheless, instead, you could just attach some fake data, ask the tool to analyze this fake data, just so you can learn what some of the techniques you might need to do later to analyze the data. I'll talk more about this possibility soon. In addition, AI tools can be very useful for helping candidates just practice using the methods they want to collect data. So, for example, a HDR candidate, a PhD student, might never have interviewed participants before for their research. So they can practice interviewing participants by using these tools. So, for example, they could write in ChatGPT or another tool something like, I'd like to practice interviewing participants. And so can we practice an interview about supervision? And can you deliver feedback on how I can improve? And so the notion is that the candidate would then maybe ask questions to the tool would provide an answer, the candidate would ask more questions as if they're practicing an interview, and then finally they can ask the tool to evaluate the questions and their interview style. And this process can be very helpful for candidates to learn how to improve their capacity to interview participants more effectively. Okay, so as I mentioned, AI tools can be used to understand the literature and to optimize your research methods. Tools can also be used to improve the capacity of candidates and other researchers to write their research reports as well. And so when I provide these examples, I'd like you to think about which of these examples do you think are appropriate and ethical? And I'll discuss some of the answers later. So for example, would you utilize a prompt like this? You could write something like, here is some information I want to discuss in my chapter, and you describe some of the key topics you'd like to address. And then you could ask the tool, in what order should I present this information to optimize the coherence of my paragraphs? In other words, you can ask the AI tool to help you generate a logical flow, an order of the arguments to optimize how you present your information. And I think that's quite a useful use of AI tools. Similarly, you could use AI tools to help you improve your writing capabilities. So for example, you could enter 2 paragraphs that you've written, and then you might enter a question like, can you offer suggestions on how I can improve my writing, such as phrases I used incorrectly or other principles I should consider? And this prompt is designed to identify some of your writing habits that you might be able to improve over time. And I think it's also quite a useful way of using AI tools to enhance the writing capabilities of PhD candidates and researchers in general. In addition, AI tools can also be used to sort of automate, streamline, and refine our processes. So just to provide one example, there is now a tool that can basically apply for jobs for you. So essentially, the tool examines some documents about you, maybe like a CV or something like that. And then the tool by itself can identify jobs on the internet that align to your needs. It can then generate job applications, like improve your CV or write about the key selection criteria. And then it can actually submit those job applications automatically, even without you knowing. Now, I'm not recommending this is a tool that you should use. I think it's actually probably quite damaging because it probably could apply for too many jobs. But it really does highlight the potential power of AI tools, both now and certainly in the future as well. At UAW in Australia, we're also starting to use AI tools to improve or create very good opportunities and practices to interact with students and other customers as well. So for example, we've created a tool where we upload our policies and information about the university, and then we basically ask the tool to answer questions from students and other customers automatically to create a chatbot. So in other words, it's much easier now to create a chatbot to answer the questions from students and other individuals than it might have been in previous years. And finally, AI tools can also be used to help candidates, like PhD students, explore future careers, as well as begin internships or other sort of placement opportunities. So, for example, we know that many students are a little bit reluctant to try internships, placements, work experience, and so forth. So AI tools can often be used to overcome some of their reluctance and to increase their confidence. So they might write a prompt like, look, I'm seeking an internship in, say, bioengineering. What are some recent trends or technologies that I need to learn about to help me really flourish in this role and to give me the confidence to pursue these possibilities? Or they could enter something like, here is a job ad, and they'd enter the job advertisement. And then they could write a question like, look, as specifically as possible, can you suggest the skills I need to develop to succeed in this role? And that could help the candidate identify some short, maybe courses or information they might need to read about before they apply for a particular role, or at least before they begin a particular internship. Or similarly, there are tools like Prepo that can be used to help candidates or people in general prepare for interviews. So essentially, all you need to do is upload this job ad into the AI tool, and then the AI tool will actually ask typical questions that the candidate is likely to receive in an interview. And so that can help the candidate practice interviews before potential real interviews in the future. And finally, when applying for a job, it's often very important to really understand the organisation and to read all the different materials on the websites. Unfortunately, if people are applying for many jobs, they don't really have the time to read the entire website of all the companies to which they're applying. So there are particular tools, such as one called Website Summary, that can actually summarize all the web pages about a particular company to facilitate and to expedite this task. Okay, so that's the first topic we wanted to discuss. And all of that sounds like fun, and I'm sure you've all used AI in similar ways in the past, but I'm also sure that you have some doubts and skepticism about whether AI really should be used in the way it is. So the question is, how do we balance that need to be creative and efficient with our use of AI while ensuring that we're aware of some of the ethical responsibilities and other challenges and the risks that AI might present? Well, at UIW, particularly in Australia at least, our general message is to tell candidates that they can use AI as creatively as they like, because we really want them to develop that capability, provided they're aware of 4 key cautions or caveats. So provided they follow these cautions and rules, then they can use AI as efficiently as they like. So what are these rules? Well, the first rule is that we tell candidates, and indeed all of our students, that they obviously can't upload any private information into these tools. So they can't, for example, upload articles that are copyrighted, that are closed access rather than open access. They can't upload sensitive data, or they can't really upload anything that could be intellectual property, such as information they might include in a patent later, unless the AI tool is secure. And I'll clarify what we mean by secure later. So that's the first principle they need to follow. The second principle they need to follow is that candidates need to ensure that they don't plagiarize, that is, they don't lift the answers that AI generates into their own work. So if AI generates, a whole series of paragraphs, such as summaries of a literature review, candidates can't plagiarize or lift that information and place that in their own thesis or research proposals or anything like that. Although I'll talk about a couple of caveats and qualifications to that statement later. Thirdly, candidates need to ensure that they also verify the answers that AI tools generate. So, for example, if AI tools are generating information about specific references or citations, then of course candidates must check that information later because as we all know, AI still is generating many sort of false outputs, sometimes called hallucinations. And finally, we ensure that all candidates must acknowledge the use of their AI in the acknowledgement section of their thesis. And they also need to learn how to cite AI outputs as well. But this first point, that they must acknowledge AI in their acknowledgement section, is critical, and I'll clarify exactly what we mean by that later. So why are these 4 cautions so important? Well, firstly, if candidates upload private information or enter private information into the prompts, a whole series of problems could arise. The first is that it is possible that that information could shape future answers. So information that they think will be private might be generated in the output of other users, compromising its privacy. So for example, if you upload something that could be intellectual property into a particular tool, that information could skew future responses that other people receive. Those other people essentially will receive your intellectual property, and therefore you might not be able to, for example, apply for a patent on that property. Secondly, there are people, on the end of these AI tools that are often checking the legitimacy of the AI, and they can also upload that private information. But finally, the AI companies themselves can still access all of that information. It's in their databases, and they can sell or use that data in other ways in the future. And we don't exactly know how they're going to use that data, so it's definitely a risk to upload anything that could be private. So why is this issue about plagiarism so important? That is, why is it that candidates can't lift the answers from AI into their thesis? Well, one reason is that the answers that AI generate might be derived from some other paper or book. That's not how AI normally generates answers. It normally obviously uses particular neural networks and so forth to generate these words. But nevertheless, the words that an AI tool can generate might resemble or be very similar to sentences or paragraphs in other articles or books. So if candidates therefore lift the output of AI, they might actually be plagiarizing an article or book. And of course, we know that that can be quite serious misconduct, generate a whole lot of issues. So candidates, that is PhD students and all students, need to be aware that if they do lift the answer from AI, they actually may be caught for plagiarism later. So why is it so important to verify answers? Well, as I mentioned before, AI will often generate false answers that quite look convincing, particularly when it's unsure. And there's a whole series of strategies that have been developed over time to reduce the likelihood of these false answers, these hallucinations. So for example, if you ask the AI tool something like, can you specify how confident you are with the answer? The AI tool will generate a rough estimate and then maybe concede that they're not particularly sure of an answer. And that can help you differentiate hallucinations from actual answers. Nevertheless, even this strategy and many other strategies themselves have not been shown to completely eradicate the likelihood of hallucinations. And finally, it's obviously important to acknowledge the use of AI. And indeed, we're now actually instructing candidates that they must, in their acknowledgement section, specify how they used AI. That is, they need to specify which AI tools they used, the uses, like those, why they used AI, and some examples of the prompts as well. If they have decided not to use AI in their research at all, then they must specify that they hadn't used AI. And the reason for that is that we envisage that the vast majority of candidates will use AI to facilitate their research. So if they don't acknowledge the use of AI, we just assume that they forgot to acknowledge rather than they didn't use AI. So if they actually didn't use AI, they need to be explicit about that. They need to explicitly say that no AI tools were used to facilitate the research of this thesis. Okay. So I mentioned these sort of 4 caveats or cautions or limitations in the use of AI. Nevertheless, there are some boundaries around these cautions. There are some possibilities in which these cautions can be relaxed in particular circumstances. So, for example, candidates can upload private information, such as sensitive data, in particular situations, provided the AI tool is secure, provided they have strong evidence that the AI tool will not use the data for any other purpose, such as training or selling. So, for example, UAW are still in discussions around different versions of Copilot that can be used that will be secure. And this is an ongoing conversation, and there'll be more information about how the university will make sure that the Copilot versions they have are entirely secure. There are particular AI tools that people can download onto their computer, what are called smaller local models, and they tend to be secure as well. There are also AI tools like Trellant that can check whether or not a particular tool is secure as well. So I mentioned before that candidates, or indeed no researchers, should lift the output of an AI tool and place it in their own thesis, paper, or publication. But again, there are some limitations to that concern. So, for example, let's suppose that an AI candidate had, let's suppose that you had written a paragraph and that you upload the paragraph into AI, and then you ask the tool to delete words so this paragraph is more concise. Well, the paragraph the AI will then generate is basically your work, but just without some words. So if you lift that AI, the response, that's probably not plagiarism, because really it's just your words that you'd written with just some of the words or unnecessary redundant words being removed. So I wouldn't regard that as plagiarism. This is probably a case where you can just lift the answer that AI has generated and place it in your own work. So there are situations in which you can lift the output from AI, provided you're confident that you're not plagiarizing anyone else's work. I'll skip that. And I won't talk about it now, but there are ways in which candidates can actually cite AI if AI is actually generating answers. This is not a common use of AI, but there is information about that we have on our website. In particular, if you're interested in more information about these issues, on the UOW HDR page is a reference to AI. So if you actually Google UOW HDR and generative AI, UOW HDR and generative AI, you'll find a whole series of instructions and documents that both students and their supervisors can use to optimize AI or use AI effectively. And it'll talk about some of these nuances that we won't have time to discuss today. Now, I mentioned there are only really 4 key matters that we feel that HDR candidates must fulfill before they use AI. But of course, these 4 key matters don't necessarily address all the different risks of artificial intelligence. Indeed, there are many other risks and issues that over time we should be teaching our candidates and indeed other researchers as well. So, for example, we know that the output that AI generates tends to be biased. It'll tend to generate output or ideas that are more in line with English-speaking publications and English-speaking data and companies. And therefore, the information that generates may not be representative of a particular topic. It might be biased towards a particular perception or ideology, and it's something that all users need to be aware of. So just as an example, if you ask a tool to create a picture of a judge, it'll almost automatically create a picture of a male judge about 99% of the time, even though at least a third, if not more, judges around the world are female. So this is an example of a bias in the AI tools that currently exist. Another caveat we need to consider is the notion that examiners vary on how they feel about the use of AI in thesis. Some examiners will accept AI, but other examiners, regardless of the instructions we provide them, will feel that AI shouldn't be used in research. And they might therefore, in some ways, judge the research more unfavorably if they know that the candidate relied very much on AI to facilitate their research. Now, we're trying to challenge this perception by providing instructions to examiners that highlight the importance of AI, that highlight that the university is encouraging the use of AI, but nevertheless, we need to be aware that some examiners will have biases that are difficult to challenge. We also need to be aware of the possibility in the foreseeable future, maybe 5, 10, or 20 years from now, that AI could create lots of damage to human society. So just as almost a thought experiment, let's suppose that you create an AI tool that was specifically designed to maximize the production of, say, paper clips. And that's all it was designed to do. Over time, the tool might recognize, well, actually, if I need to maximize the production of paper clips, we need to ensure that anything that is different from paper clips or that could impede that focus on that issue is not focused on. So it might start trying to turn off information or even turn off machines that are unrelated to the production of paper clips. Indeed, it might recognize that actually the main impediment to the production of paper clips are humans, because they might, for example, not be investing enough and want the investment in some other machine or something like that. So the AI tool might try to derive information and introduce other changes that's designed to kill people. Now, I'm not saying that'll happen. That might seem fanciful, but it is just an example to highlight that we don't really know the dangers of AI in the future, particularly once AI becomes more embedded within our existing systems and practices. And there are many other risks that HDR candidates might need to consider. I won't talk about all these, but of course, we know that AI tools generate huge carbon emissions and are very costly to the environment. We know that some people use jailbreaks, which is where they try to find ways of circumventing the limitations placed on AI. So, for example, an AI tool might have a limitation in that it's specifically designed not to provide information that could be used for terrorism or some other nefarious purpose. But nevertheless, programmers can easily include prompts and other strategies that are designed to overcome those boundaries, reducing the safety of AI tools. Okay. So therefore, finally, I want to discuss, well, how as a supervisor should you ensure the appropriate use of AI? How do you ensure that candidates are using AI appropriately? And how do you ensure that you're selecting people who are likely to use AI appropriately? So let me discuss some of these matters. So firstly, what we're recommending is that since the advent of AI, and since it's so easy for candidates to use AI to improve their work, we greatly recommend that supervisors dedicate a lot more time writing drafts and providing feedback on those drafts together. So in particular, we recommend that actually, rather than the usual strategy, where candidates would write a draft, submit the draft, and then the supervisor might correct that draft in the evening or whatever it might be, we actually recommend that supervisors and candidates dedicate time to sit down and write drafts together, where they might sort of plan particular arguments, and where the supervisor might even provide feedback on drafts in person rather than separately asynchronously. And this strategy ensures that supervisors develop a better idea on the skills and capabilities of candidates. They can identify whether candidates are struggling and maybe address those issues, and they can identify what the limitations and capabilities of that candidate are. As a consequence, they're much more likely to be able to identify times in which the candidate might have used AI inappropriately, or at least they're more likely to redress some of the concerns that candidates are experiencing, concerns that might increase their reliance on AI in the future. If supervisors, I should say, are concerned that candidates might be overusing AI, there are a whole series of tools that can be used to check whether or not a particular piece of work was produced by AI. So there are tools like binoculars, is the name of one AI tool, but there are many other AI tools that are specifically designed to test the likelihood that a particular piece of work was produced by AI. Now, these tools are imperfect, partly because there are other tools that are designed to obscure the extent to which work looks like AI. So, for example, candidates could write something using AI, then they could use another tool that's designed to reduce the extent to which that work looks like it's produced by AI. Nevertheless, this strategy still can be useful to identify some circumstances where supervisors are a bit concerned about whether or not the work that candidates have been writing is indeed their own work. In addition, we're sort of greatly recommending that supervisors try to develop the AI skills of their particular candidates. They should talk about the cautions. They should talk about the benefits and functions of different AI tools. They could discuss a bit about prompt engineering, which I'll talk about in a moment, and so forth. And the ideal is that actually, if candidates are taught a little bit about how to use AI effectively, including its caveats, firstly, they might use AI appropriately, but secondly, they're more likely to acknowledge and concede and confess to the use of AI to supervisors. So supervisors are having a better sense of how the candidates are using AI, and therefore they can sort of prompt them to use that AI appropriately. This strategy overlooks or overcomes the problem where many candidates are using AI in secret. And so supervisors are not aware of how they're using AI, and therefore they can't really guide them appropriately. And for example, supervisors could teach them this particular acronym, which is an acronym that can be used to determine how to decide the appropriateness of an AI tool. I won't talk about that in any detail, but just to be aware, there is an acronym that is available, this one here, that helps people identify whether a tool is appropriate to use or inappropriate. Another complication that supervisors might experience is when they're actually selecting AI candidates for the future, not AI candidates, HDR candidates for the future. In the past, it used to be quite simple. What would happen is that we might ask a candidate, or sorry, an applicant, a potential candidate, to write maybe a short research proposal. And then as a supervisor, we could evaluate whether or not that candidate seems to have the skills that are necessary to complete a PhD. Can they write effectively? Can they formulate arguments? Do they understand research and so forth? The problem is that nowadays, of course, applicants can so easily use AI to generate those research proposals or to answer other questions that you might ask. So it's much harder to evaluate the quality of our PhD candidates to decide whether or not to take them on. Fortunately, there are a whole lot of strategies that you can use to increase the likelihood that applicants will write themselves rather than rely on AI. So, for example, you could ask questions that are clearly very personal to them, in which it's hard to ask AI to ask that question. Or you could ask a question that you know that AI isn't aware about. So, for example, at UAW in Australia, we've introduced a technique called the HDR fair game, which is sort of a gamified practice to encourage candidates to undertake more training. If we ask a potential applicant whether they've heard about this game, well, we know they probably haven't. So we know that they either have to respond honestly, or if they rely on the AI, they'll probably generate incorrect information. So by doing this, we're more likely to generate an honest response and be able to evaluate their own writing and the way they think and so forth. And some of these other questions are also designed for that particular purpose. They're designed to ask questions that will generate more honest responses rather than rely on AI. And finally, I won't talk about it now, but I might discuss later if I have the chance. We do have some slides here, and I'll present those later, on how to write effective prompts. It's not easy to teach candidates if they don't know exactly how to write a good prompt in an AI tool. And this is a slide that's designed to highlight some of the key features of an effective prompt. I won't discuss that slide in detail, but I'll just provide a couple of examples. So for example, here is a particular prompt that looks very long, but it's actually quite effective. And it includes some very key features. So for example, it includes the sentence, I need to complete this thesis within 6 months. That is, includes a sentence that provides a sense of urgency. And some research shows that prompts that include that sense of urgency motivate or initiate a more complete answer. That is, without this sense of urgency, sometimes the AI tool will not provide a comprehensive answer. It might say something like, you can assess this literature by, just reading these documents rather than provide the answer itself. If you include a little prompt like, I need to complete this thesis within 6 months, the AI tool knows that there's an urgency, and they might therefore provide a more complete answer to you. You can also see it says, can you please answer my questions carefully in the role of the pedantic examiner? So it's very important when writing a prompt to specify the role that you want the AI tool to take, whether you want it to sort of act like an examiner, a supervisor, a researcher, a friend, or whatever it might be, because that'll actually change the style and scope of the answer. And often I ask the tool to sort of act in the role of a reviewer or a pedantic researcher or something like that to ensure the answers I generate are also quite precise. There's other examples that are quite useful. So for example, it says here, for example, perhaps stress might impair concentration during examples. This answer includes a citation that's useful and so forth. What this example is designed to provide, this green writing, is that whenever you provide a prompt, it's quite helpful to include an answer, like a sample answer, as well as a justification of why that answer could be useful. And that tactic has been shown to improve the answers that AI tends to generate. In addition, you can also include the sentence, please start your answer with the phrase, my best guess is. And this phrase, at least in the past, has been shown to generate more attempts by AI to answer your question. If you don't include this phrase, the AI tool will often write something like, look, I'm not sure of the answer to this question. You should examine this literature instead, or whatever it might be. But if you add this particular blue phrase, the AI tool will tend to try to generate an answer, and that can be quite useful as well. In the future, we'll sort of also present more information about some of the advances in AI that could be particularly useful, such as retrieval augmented generation, which AI aims to utilize, and so forth, multi-agent systems as well. So all of this information is actually available on the website. We won't have time to discuss it now, but if you'd like more information on some of these advances or another workshop on some of these advances, we're happy to comply. So that's all I wanted to say at this stage. It's now over to Honglin. Just stop scaring.
Okay. Good afternoon. Let me move to. Sorry, I'm not used to your okay. Now I can scroll to where my slides are. Okay. Thank you, Simon, for such a rich introduction to the efficient use. And there's a lot of potential and we can see the power and potential of AI tools. My background is in language and literacy education, and my own PhD is on authorship and attribution. On citation practices and knowledge making. So I'm going to apply some of the work that I've done and really looking at how can we guide the conversation about the ethical and responsible use from the lens of authorship. Is authorship still relevant today, and how do we uphold those principles of ethical of authorship practices? So that will be my focus today, and it won't be. I'll go really deep into one area that Simon has already introduced around the notion of acknowledgement, around the notion of ethical and responsible and accountability of authors. Okay, so now Simon has talked about the emergence of AI tools. And there's one study that's published by Digital Education Council Global AI student survey in 2024. And 3,008 students, 39 students were invited across 16 countries and from multiple disciplines. And what the students said was that 42 of them stated they use Grammarly for grammar checking, and 24 used the tools for creating a first draft. And so these tools like Grammarly and ChatGPT has become everyday companions in academic writing. They provide efficiency, as Simon said, and they provide support, but they also disrupt the traditional practices of learning to write. Okay, and so the emergence of AI raises these fundamental ethical questions. Who is the author? And how do we define authorship in this AI mediated environment? And when an AI tool shapes the text, and how transparent should the students be about AI use? But how do we guide the process? And I think my passion is about creating environment to inspire change. And I think it's about the process, guiding the practices in writing, guiding the practices in researching, not banning, not pub, putting in place punitive actions, which they are important too. Those sticks are important too. And what does originality mean in this new research landscape? And so, and I think that there are a lot of challenges around the over-reliance and the boundary between assistance and authorship. And that boundary is sometimes can be blurred. And so it's really requiring us as supervisors to really to talk to students, to provide some clearer ethical frameworks. And so my question is, how can we guide the students so they still can maintain their authentic academic voice in their writing? And so Simon has talked about that, the access. But another ethical issue, I think, is unequitable access to AI tools. Some students have a paid version, which has premium tools and potential more use, and the others don't. And so that creates some disadvantages in terms of access and success. Okay, so there are risks and the challenges. And for me as a literacy educator, I asked question about how can we really use AI to scaffold learning, and how can we reduce that over-reliance? The over-reliance might raise ethical questions. They reduce critical thinking, and they weakening students' writing skills, and really undermining academic and research integrity. So how do we facilitate the conversation so that we really uphold all the principles of responsible research conduct? Okay. So my proposition, my pitch is, let's focus on the notion of authorship. Let's focus on the notion of centering the authorship in our discussion, in our conversation with the students. Okay, so this is the way what I'm going to propose, and I think I like to open up for your feedback and the conversation. And so one of the way that we can think about to help students to navigate these ethical challenges in writing is to reframe authorship itself and really have a focused lens and deep understanding what it means to be an author. And my background is in English language, literature, and education. Okay, and we've learned the evolution of authorship, started from the Romantic period, the ideal of author who is a solitary, who is the creator of the words on the page. And when we see in the post-structuralist period, which I'll come to detail, where there is that the text is co-created through the context, through your interaction with the reader and the context. So that brings the notion of intertextuality, originality, and etc. And now today, the authorship is collective. It is hybrid and it's networked and it is all distributed. And so but by going through, looking at this evolution, I'm hoping that we can provide some framework around which that you can use, that you can draw on to talk to your students about what it means to be an author and how and to teach those textual practices that can uphold those ethical responsibility. Okay, so I've introduced the three lenses, the very romantic, very early periods of conception of authorship, and to the post-structuralist, and to the more creative, the hybrid distributed lenses. But why do they matter? Why do they matter for supervision, and why are they important? So this notion of authorship is very close to my heart. It's part of my PhD study. And so it's when we talk about authorship, it's not just about deciding whose names on the paper goes on the paper. And what we need to think about the theories of authorship that help us to really understand, guide candidates in terms of recognizing contribution, knowledge making. How do we create knowledge, and how do we recognize the contributions, give credit, and understanding their new role in this new environment. Okay, so I want to go a little bit of a deeper into the post-structuring, where the author is decentered, is decontextualized. So that goes back to the mid-20th century. So you can see a few names you're probably familiar with. One is Roland Barthes, who declared the death of author. And so the texts don't carry meaning, simply because what the author intended. Instead, meaning emerges through the reader, through interpretation and intertextuality and cultural context. And you have Michael Foucault, who went further and describing author not as a person, but an author function. So it's a kind of the label society attached to text to give them status and order. And Derrida and Eco reminded us that texts are always open, unstable, and dependent on multiple meanings, and not just one original mind. So what this means then, I think this is very significant. This post-structuralist definition of authorship is significant and offers ideas for us to talk to students about the construction of text, of thesis. So authorship is not fixed, it's negotiated, relational, and embedded in context. And so what it means then is meaning is not shaped by, meaning is always shaped by the readers and the context. And so this is important when we have a conversation with our HDR candidates to think about their originality, to think about their voice in their writing, and to think about writing as having conversation, as a dialogue with the reader, with the context, building on the existing knowledge, the tapestry of knowledge and history, and building that conversation and construct dialogue. And so I think a takeaway lesson for us from that theory, that post-structuralist theory of originality and the intertextuality, is that we need to help students to develop a critical awareness. Critical awareness really matters. Critical awareness, helping students to see writing not as producing words. I think sometimes students struggle because they see them as producing those words, but as entering into a conversation with others, okay? And so every piece of writing draw on prior text, the voices and ideas, knowledge and the citations. And this is what intertextuality means. It's about creating those tapestry of texts to draw on knowledge, the literature review, and the critiquing, and bring your voices in. So, and that's it's the foundation of good writing. And so I think I think those awareness is crucial for ethical practice, in in um, in that we should encourage those proper acknowledgement, respect for others' contributions, and their confidence in their own voices. So I think the takeaway from this is that writing is dialogue. Originality emerges through how students position their voices among others, which is a very fundamental to any thesis writing, to any to research communication. So my question then to you is, how can we train our HDR candidates to see that citation not as a burden, not as a formality, but as the fabric of their research dialogue? Okay. So now I'm coming to the other lens, is more legal and ethical lens. And so this legal and ethical frameworks really make one principle really clear, that human responsibility cannot be outsourced to AI, cannot be outsourced to somebody else. It has to be human. And so the COPE guidelines, Committee on Publication and Ethics, really emphasizes that transparency, accountability in authorship decisions. And so integrity is the foundation of that research. And ICMJE criteria set really minimum standards in terms of defining authorship in terms of substantial contributions to conception or design, drafting, revising, or final approval. And so our university's authorship guidelines draws on these international best practices or standards. And the Berne Convention again frame authorship as tied to human creativity and the rights of attribution. So these guidelines matter in the age of AI because machines can generate text, but they cannot assume accountability. And the cautions that Simon mentioned is really a nice example of that biases. There might be biases and fallacies that's presented in the AI generated text. So humans needs to be held accountable for what they're going to present there in their own writing. So authorship is anchored in human accountability, and AI can assist, but humans remain responsible for ideas and integrity. So I wanted to draw out implication from each lens so that then together we can create some resources for supervisors to engage the conversation, to guide and mentor integrity with our students. So, and from our work, we know authorship is one of the most source of confusion and the dispute in research. And I am sure Simon has dealt with a lot of disputes around authorship. And so these conventions, the notion of authorship needs to be taught, needs to be instructed really explicitly. The explicit instruction is a notion from my field, from the literacy education, meaning we need to spell out the rules. What are the rules? What are the principles of accountability here? And so the supervisor play a critical role in really making those assumptions, making those rules explicit and visible to our HDR candidates. Clear guidance on what counts as substantial contribution, okay? And then how the order of authors is determined, what responsibilities come with being an author helps prevent those misunderstandings later. And explicit the instructions also means that we need to talk about disciplinary differences, because what counts as contribution, substantial contribution in a science discipline might be different from what counts as contribution in social sciences where I'm from. And so the principles of fairness, transparency, and accountability really needs to be remain constant in our conversation with our students. So the key takeaway, I think, from this lens is that authorship convention must be taught and discussed and made transparent. So my question then to you then is, when and how do you talk to your students about authorship? How early should that be? And so in our at UOW main campus, we have a commencement of a candidature process or form, and that where authorship is centered very much in that process. So I think talk about authorship as early as possible in your first meeting with the students, and setting those expectations, setting those rules explicit at outset will really pave the way for the later practices, and then reinforce those notions constantly will help to develop students into ethical and confident writers in the future. Okay, so I won't go into details in terms of UOW authorship guidelines, but UOW has its own authorship policy, which defines who is author and what counts as authorship. And so, authorship is defined by significant intellectual and scholarly contribution. And if we use that as the foundation, as the guidance and anchoring the AI use in this authorship. And I think that will really prevent a lot of misuse and unethical use. So that's why I think centering our discussion of ethical and responsible use around the notion of authorship is important, is helpful. So other resources you might find useful on our website, the authorship acknowledgement procedure, of course, the UOW Code of Practice Responsible Conduct Research really sets the overarching expectations for integrity, ethics, and professionalism. And authorship policy that I've taken an extract defines what constitutes authorship. And acknowledgement procedure really provides clarity on how contributions are recognized, including when acknowledgement rather than authorship is appropriate. And of course, there's always will be disagreements, okay? And so when the disagreements occur, we have a authorship dispute resolution procedures which can guide us. How do we deal with, how do we respond, how do we navigate and respond to those disagreements? And there's a form authorship and acknowledgement agreement forms that can give you some practical tools available that can guide you to help research teams to document and agree on contributions early and preventing issues later on down the track. Okay, so I'm coming to the third lens which is now we are in the digital creativity lens, where the authorship is no longer the work of a single author genius in a romantic period. It is this now where we are now. The authorship is defined by those postmodern thoughts, Barthes, Foucault, etc. Authorship is seen as distributed. Okay, it's shared across humans, technologies, data, and even organizations. Okay, so meaning is co-constructed, not created in isolation. And so for HDR candidates, this shift is really important, is really relevant. And so the research writing involves human AI hybrid texts, but this shouldn't diminish their authorship. But the students need to learn how to edit, how to be responsible for shaping, verifying, and taking ownership of their work. And so I think authorship today, so that's my key takeaway point at the bottom. Authorship today is really distributed, and responsibility still lies in curating, sorry, there's a word missing there, editing, and humans remain accountable. So I think if we anchoring our discussion around that human responsibility, accountability, that will help to students navigate those AI challenges. Simon has talked about how we need to be designing prompt is a very important part of efficient use. So I want to introduce the notion of critical AI literacy. So it's not more than critical AI literacy is more than knowing how to use tools. It's about use them responsibly and ethically. And so I think candidates need to build three key skills in order to become critical AI user. They need to know how to design prompts effectively, crafting clear, purposeful prompts to guide AI outputs. And they need to be a critical user, constantly critically evaluating outputs and questioning, appraising the accuracy, the bias, the relevance of AI, what AI produces. And we know AI produces sometimes a lot of very generic and non-relevant and sometimes the false information. So it's our responsibility to constantly appraising, analyzing, and then incorporating ethically. And finally, we need to help them to learn how to maintain that academic voice, their own voice, the voice of a writer, ensuring that their final texts really reflect their own arguments, their own style and accountability, not the AI's voice. So I think that introducing that critical AI literacy is, I think, the challenge and also the opportunities for the next few years for us in the higher degree research training. And so that the students, moving students from passive consumers of AI, but became more active and responsible creators of their producers of their scholarly work. So again, I think the key takeaway is AI literacy means shaping, critiquing, and owning authorship, not reproducing or outsourcing the authorship to people. So I want to challenge you to think about how can you teach your candidates to really harness AI as a tool without letting it to dilute their own academic voice, their scholarly work. I think this will be my last slide. So as we wrap up, I want to bring us back to that big picture, that the focus of our discussion today, which is ethical and responsible use, and really reflect on our role as supervisors, our responsibility as supervisor is not simply regulate AI use, but prepare candidates to become more innovative, responsible authors in this AI mediated research environment. And this means four things, which I have already touched on. I think where our students need to develop their own critical AI literacy, and we should, I think, as supervisors, need to upskill ourselves. And we need to help them to uphold those ethical authorship practices and develop their skills to integrate text, to create conversation, create dialogue to create those intertextuality to produce knowledge, and supporting students in editing, contextualizing, critically waiving AI outputs. That's in integrated authorship roles. But importantly, help them always reflect on the notion of authorship and their own identity as an academic writer. And so in this way, we could help to shape critical writers and thinkers, which is a book that I'm writing now for the secondary school context. I think that's all I wanted to say. We got a few minutes if people want to ask questions. I'll stop sharing. Are there any questions for Simon and myself and me?
Good afternoon. Yes.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm Dr. Sulaiman from Nan Campus. Thank you very much to Simon and this.
Sorry, Dr. Sulaiman, we can't hear your voice.
Sorry, because I was using an headphone. I thought. Hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much once again, Professor Simon and Professor On. It's a very, very timely workshop that you brought today because me and few of my colleagues are actually currently doing research on this particular issue, and you've cleared a lot of things that came out from our first research result. So because we did a kind of mixed method, a sequential mixed method to be specific. So one of the things that came out from our interview with the student, because we based our research, the first phase on student, the second phase will be on lecturers, actually, or academics. And so one of the things that came out that really gave us a kind of concern was the ethical side of things, because yes, we try to encourage our students to use AI to support their academic activities so that it can work more effectively and efficiently due to the current fast pace of things in education and everywhere in the world, and to also bring them to par to what is happening today in the society, generally preparing them for the business world as it is. So again, we noticed that majority of them showed concern of how much AI should we use? What are those ethical landscape that will guide us from using? And it was a little bit interesting because we ourselves as academics, for instance, I also don't have this information in full. So now that Professor Moss mentioned that we could find something like that in the UOW website, it really brings, shed more light and give us more confidence now to proceed, because that was one of the things that was delaying us as to starting the second phase of our research. But now it really gave us a key to move forward. So I just want to thank you. And I also want to ask if there is a kind of a blueprint that actually showcases this ethical, landscape that we could reference in our work. It will really help us a lot. Thank you very much.
Simon, do you want to comment?
I might comment first. So thank you for your comments. And actually, just in response to your survey, I'd love to see the results. Our experience is very similar, which is that if anything, we feel the candidates are not utilizing AI enough because of their fears that they may be sort of breaching some sort of code or regulations. So although we're so focused on the candidates that might be cheating, but really from what we can tell, the vast majority are probably too afraid to use AI enough, and hopefully some of this information will help. But in relation to whether or not we had clear references, that's a good question, because I mentioned that all those documents that we have on the website, okay, and those documents have lots of references that you can utilize, but that particular document on the cautions, those 4 key caveats, I'm actually not sure there's references in there. So if you need more, I'm happy to explore that with you. So maybe send me an email, and I'm because there might be a lack of references for some of those sections.
Thank you very much, Prof. Moss. That actually gives us a kind of gap, actually, currently. Yeah. But again, we're trying to take our time to step, not to put our feet both into the waters at the same time. So again, now you've shown us exactly that, because when we looked around, we found that majority of places, they couldn't provide that concrete, ethical landscape that we could reference to. And we want to take it as a kind of a gap, actually. So this confirms, and yes, I will email you for more guidance on way forward with that.
And I should
Thank you.
mention, sort of consistent with what you're saying, there are lots of codes, so obviously most of the funding bodies and many countries will have codes of what they consider to be appropriate use of AI. But I'm not sure, they're very broad and they're very general and they're quite detailed.
Yes.
Where I didn't feel that those broader codes are necessarily relevant to research students in particular, or even university students in general. So I do agree there probably is a gap, even though there's probably some references to codes that you can use, but I'm not so sure they're helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll send you that email to get more clarification. Thank you very much.
Is there any question from you guys?
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
This is Sodis. Hi, Prof. Simon and Prof. Chen. Thank you so much. It's a very insightful session. I was just, as I was listening, I was just reflecting a little on how when we initially started, and how there was so much of regulation in terms of, we most likely policing our students in terms of not using AI, right? But I think as we move forward, we realize that it's about embracing and using it as an ethical tool as we move forward. Just wanted to get some insights with regards to what has been the experience in Australia in terms of from the faculty. I think some of the faculty members would have the perception that use of the AI should not be allowed. But I think there's a change in mindset moving forward. Hence why students would also take the stance that they would need to be not open about using AI as well. So just want to know what's the landscape like in Australia? What has been some of the experiences, if you can share with us, some of the good practices we can share with us in terms of getting the buy-in from the faculty as well.
Simon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I'll be able to characterize what's been happening very succinctly. I agree with you that even in Australia there was a lot of warnings and cautions initially, and then one of the most prestigious universities in Australia were quite explicit about trying to encourage different types of use, and they sort of had three models. They sort of had a model where they said, look, for these circumstances or these subjects, we want as much use as possible, no restrictions. Here you can use it in, provided you fulfill particular rules. And then a third group was more like where you can't use it, except for in particular cases. So they sort of had different types of courses, and that's and actually, Colin, you probably know more about this actually. And so this was sort of designed to try to provide some sort of really good examples and templates of how students can use AI in different ways, and the sorts of assignments in which AI is most useful. So then there became a lot of conversation on how you create assignments that are specifically designed to be quite impervious to cheating with AI, for example. So these assignments were very explicitly around AI, is where the first question might have been, you'd have to actually use AI to answer the question. And then the next part of the assignment would be, what were the limitations of the AI? What were some of the problems? What did you discover? Using other tools and those sorts of things. So almost sort of forcing people to use AI and then forcing people to question their use of AI, and that'd be quite effective. Look, but on the other hand, I do get the sense that a lot of the initial excitement of the use of AI has been slightly tempered or slowed recently, as universities are trying to grapple with exactly which systems they're going to use. Because I think they've worked out that really, although everyone's going to be using ChatGPT, like the public versions, they're going to have to invest in their own university-specific tools as well. They're a lot more secure. But because those tools are changing quite rapidly, I think they're really struggling with knowing how to make these decisions about how much to invest in their own tools. And I think all of the institutions are really struggling with this issue. And that, I think, has slowed down the use of AI. But that'll change quite quickly. And I think the other thing they're really waiting for is AI tools that are much more embedded within our activities. Because at the moment, they're a little bit separate. You have this AI tool over here. Yes, there's AI tool that's in software, like Word or Excel, but there's not really AI tools that are sort of linking different systems together. So it's still quite clunky, as I'm sure you know. And I think a lot of the universities are now waiting to see how that will change, whether AI will sort of be something that's a lot more integrated within our sort of current normal processes, and then how we're going to deal with that, because that'll be a whole new set of complications, I think. And sorry, I'm not really answering your question, but it was a very good question, but a very difficult one to answer succinctly.
It is a very good question. And so nationally in Australia, there is a TEXA, which is a teaching quality governance body. They publish good practices, best practices around AI use. And so all of the universities need to be compliant and really make sure that we act or respond to those guidelines appropriately. And within UW, for undergraduate and coursework subject, in the subject outline, you need to define what is appropriate use of AI in this written explicitly in the subject. So, for example, in a subject that I'm coordinating this year, this session, so we defined you can use AI for generating ideas, but cannot use AI for any writing assistance. Well, I mean, but editing is still appropriate. So I think it's defined what is appropriate and ethical use early on. And then for HDR conversations, so we have great work that Simon's done, and we have the website guiding supervisors and the student. We integrate training. I think most important thing is awareness. We need to make sure that we educate our students on ethical use. So we have a training each session on ethical and responsible use, and we have a training for supervisors and the leaders. So together we form the same conversation, same dialogue. So that's what I call the explicit instruction. So everybody needs to be on the same page.
Just a follow-up question. Prof. Simon, you did share in terms of some of the AI tools that can be used. Are these tools available? Are these information available to the students in terms of these are the things that they can actually use? Because I know there are some universities which have actually put up. So if you want to do literature review, these are some of the tools that you have, those kind of things. So is that practiced in Australia as well? Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is. So what I mentioned that website before. In the website, there'll be like one document for each different type of use of AI. So one document around how to use it for designing your research methods, one on how to use it for data analysis. And within that, there'll be a whole lot of suggestions on how to use generic AI tools for that purpose, as well as which specific tools you can use. Many of which obviously you can use for free. There's usually a free version, or there can be a paid version, but it doesn't cost very much if it's just used for a month or so. And so we do suggest those. We probably need to be careful in our language, because we're not really in a position to necessarily endorse those tools, because we don't know how the information will be used. But so we sort of provide some caveats as well. So I mentioned before that there are many tools that can analyze data, and we would sort of say to students, look, I don't think we're usually in a position to use those tools because the privacy of that data may be jeopardized. But you may be able to use those tools with some fake data, just so you can learn the sort of techniques you can use, and you can follow those suggestions in your own way. So we do provide some caveats about the tools, but probably need to do more. Because one thing we'd like to do, but really can't do, is actually assess the legitimacy of those tools. There's just too many. They're changing all the time. And many of their promises about security are really quite not necessarily accurate as well.
For someone, I'm just wondering whether this information is publicly available, meaning that if, let's say, the Malaysian students, we want to direct them to this website for them to have a better understanding, whether that will be available.
Oh, absolutely. So all those documents can be accessed from the website itself. So all they need to do is Google UOW HDR generative AI, and they can access that. I should concede, however, that the documents were probably written a few months ago, And so it's hard to keep them up to date. So as long as candidates are aware that maybe some of the documents are a little bit obsolete, but still helpful, then I think it can be a very useful resource.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Any question? Okay, so thank you. A big thank you to our speakers, Prof. Simon and Prof. Hanli, for sharing their expertise and insight with us today. Thank you all for attending today's session. We hope that you found the information valuable and it will help you in your research journey. We appreciate your participation and looking forward for seeing you in the future session. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jasmine.
Thanks.
Thank you.